fashion with our current exhibition, The Ecology of Fashion. If you haven't yet experienced it, it's on the second floor in our Kitchen Gallery. Can you hear it?
Can't hear it.
That might not be working. Can you hear me now? Oh, there we go. All right. So, as I was saying, this presentation tonight, this conversation tonight, is being presented in conjunction with our current exhibition, The Ecology of Fashion, which is located in our Dietrich Gallery on the second floor. So please come back. The Ecology of Fashion brings together two major Drexel University collections. Just a reminder that the Academy is part of Drexel University. It includes garments from the Antoinette Westfall College of Media Art and Design, Robert and Penny Fox Historic Costume Collection, with materials from the Academy's collections, as well as works by contemporary change makers. The exhibition, centered around fashion and sustainability, traces a brief, natural history of fashion, provoking us to consider, how did we get here? Grounded in flora, fauna, fungi, and fossil fuels, the exhibition is based in the materiality of our clothing and describes its impacts on land, air, and water, particularly in an era of fast fashion and now ultra-fast fashion. Our hope has been to generate greater awareness about the impacts of the garment industry on the environment to inspire change. As part of the Ecology of Fashion project, we've been very happy to be able to partner with visionary artists, designers, and local organizations, including PA Flax and PA Fibershed, co-founded by two of our panelists today, in this discussion, Conscious Fashion, Weaving a Sustainable Future. So we're grateful to WHYY and Mike and Scott, host of The Pulse, for our ongoing partnership and for hosting tonight's discussion on the complex considerations of building a more ecologically and humanly just local fashion supply chain. Maiken will integrate your written questions with her own. She's really deft at that. Just look for Desta, Sam, and Akira coming through the aisles to pass them on to her. Before we get started, I also wanted to mention that you can look forward to the Ecology of Fashion public symposium this spring on Friday, May 2nd and 3rd, Saturday, May 3rd. If you're interested in the call for submissions, since we have a lot of creative folks here and academics, we are happy to share it with you. Just reach out to me or our public program manager, Molly Gross, who I must thank for organizing tonight's program. I will now turn the program over to Maiken, who will welcome our incredible guests.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good. Hello everybody, thank you so much for coming to this wonderful event here at the Academy. I can tell that the issue of fashion, clothing, and sustainability means a lot to many of us, and I think it's a topic that all of us are becoming more aware of. Now, I'm not gonna lie, when I was a teenager, I would have loved it if clothing had been a little bit more less expensive and more abundant. You know, when I was a kid, clothing was still very expensive, especially in Germany, where I was growing up. But now, if you want to, you can constantly have a new outfit to wear, and it's really not going to cost you all that much. And I think it has led to all of us thinking less about what we spend on clothing, when we spend on clothing, and what the ultimate price is that all of us pay globally for that consumption. So tonight we want to talk about that topic, how we can become more aware, but also really come up with solutions. And everybody on our panel is really all about the solutions, and that's what I love about it. So I figured let's just go through real quick, and everybody gets a chance to introduce yourself. And Kimberly, I want you to start because you also have a special announcement and a wonderful book coming out tonight.
I'm like, am I announcing?
Yes.
Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Kimberly McGlonn. I'm the founder of Grant Blvd, now NOOR by Grant Blvd. I'm also the founder of Black Ivy Thrift. create impact. And so, is that it? Did I miss it? Am I good?
That's perfect. That's good. All right, Heidi, why don't you go next?
Hello, everyone. I'm Heidi Barr. I'm the co-founder of the PA Flax Project. My co-founder is Emma DeLong, who is a farmer in Pottstown. And we are working to reestablish the flax for linen industry in Pennsylvania from seed to spinnable fiber.
And I'm Rachel Higgins. I am the co-founder of Pennsylvania Fiber Shed. I almost just said Flax Project because it sounds the same all the time. Not the same. And my co-founder is Leslie Davidson, who's sitting up front here. And we are working to rebuild the fiber textile system and supply chain in the state of Pennsylvania. So we do everything from working with farmers, food designers, to addressing end of life for textile waste and everything in between. And I'm also a professor at Drexel in the fashion industry and merchandising department.
Great. I figured we would start small with a quick look into our own closets by talking about what we individually have done to perhaps change our consumption or think about what we consume. On my end, I think it's been wearing the same thing all the time, but calling it a style, as opposed to just wearing the same thing all the time. But I think I've really pared down what I own, and I'm fine with sort of wearing a uniform every day. Kimberly, how about you?
I love thrift. Everything I'm wearing is thrift. These shoes, my daughter got on me today because they're actually technically hers. But I paid for them, so I don't know.
We can talk about that
We
later.
can talk about it later. I'm still wearing the shoes. I think thrift for me is probably my closet is probably about 85% thrifted. And when I'm not thrifting something, I'm really trying to move into, figuring out which brands I'm going to marry versus dating. I think overconsumption tells us we just don't sleep with everybody. We just date all the brands. And for me, I think that the more I think about it, like, okay, I know this brand, I love the founder, I like the values, I believe that they're being honest about their how, then that becomes a brand that I marry. So I marry first to my own brands, and then there are a number of brands, local makers in the city whose work I also really respect, and those are the ones I try to keep in my closet.
How about you, Heidi?
My obsession is natural fibers.
Yeah.
So I have, over the last 5 years, started to not bring anything new into my closet that is not 100% natural fiber, which means there are a lot of things I don't bring into my closet. It's a difficult challenge, and I also am brand loyal. If I find a good brand that's making natural fiber items that are well made and fit me, I marry them into borrow and return. And I also have things made for me out of natural fibers that are knockoffs of things that I've had in my closet for a long time that are wearing out.
Right. So how about you, Rachel?
Agree with this. I love vintage as my go-to. I really don't buy anything new. It's pretty rare. I think there's things like we all need to buy new like underwear and socks sometimes, but besides that, I really pretty much have a rule that I don't buy it new, and if I am buying it new, I always try to support someone local. And along with what Heidi says, if I'm buying something new, it is 100% natural fibers.
Now, all of you have little cards, and if you have questions, which I know you do, please write them down. Write a little bit bigger because with the glare it's a little hard to read. And then just raise your hand. Somebody will pick up the cards and the question and pass them up throughout the conversation. So I will just weave them in. So don't forget to write your questions, okay? Let's talk now a little bit big picture. Again, I don't want this to be all gloom and doom tonight. I want to talk a lot about solutions, but I do think we have to paint a big picture. Thank you. Rachel, I think it was you who said in one of our conversations leading up to this event that right now, no single part of the textile industry and fashion industry is sustainable in any way, shape, or form, which is a big statement, right? So let's all talk a little bit about the state of the union, if you will, in terms of like what is happening in textiles and fashion and clothing worldwide.
And I wanted to clarify that statement a little bit also. There are pieces of the supply chain that are certainly able to be sustainable, yes. But when you put the whole thing together, it's really not possible right now. Especially right now, we're in a really global economy. So many of you saw the map outside and where your clothing came from. That's that label is only showing you where it last landed before it ended up in the store. So your clothing could go from China to India to the US to somewhere else. It can go all over the world before it gets to you. And there's many, many, many hands that touch your clothing before it comes to you. And I think what's really important to also note is that, especially when we're talking about natural fibers, often your fiber starts on a farm with a farmer who has to deal with a crop or an animal. And if you can just imagine the amount of labor that just goes into that one little piece before it even gets turned into fiber, before it gets turned into yarn, before it gets turned into fabric, before it gets dyed, before then it has to get cut and sewn, and then it gets turned into something, it needs labels to be attached to it, it might need to get printed, like there's just package, right? There's so many different steps and pieces of this whole puzzle. So we really can't make 100% sustainable garment. That really doesn't exist. But there are certain pieces within that supply chain that can be sustainable.
Heidi, do you want to add to that?
At scale, you can't make 100% sustainable garments. So at a very small scale, you can. But our system doesn't function at a very small scale. It's a very big beast. So my thing is natural fibers. My thing is talking about how textiles are either an agricultural product or they're an oil product. And if we can recenter textile production into diversified agricultural systems, then we will have cracked a large part of that nut. But the next piece is that we need manufacturing infrastructure to manufacture natural textiles, and we need it at regional scale. And the beast we've created is one where things go through all those hands and all over the world, and yet they cost $5. And the only way that can happen is if the natural world and human labor are exploited.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine why clothing is so cheap, given that everything you just outlined. How can it be this cheap?
I mean, I think so much of that goes back to the things that we are taught to ignore. Not that we're not taught to see them, is that we're taught to ignore them, which is the global economy very much so is rooted, particularly in this industry, in the vestiges of American slavery. So when you talk about a global supply chain that has rooted itself in a history of deep human abuse, and then just exported that to a place where it's harder to see it, then we can get a sense of, at scale, why we're all backwards in this way, and the ways in which we've all been kind of forced into some unfair complicity, which we may or may not, be aware of or comfortable with, but that still exists. And so, and I think for those of us who are not seeking to be abusive, we're still sitting under the feet of a different kind of abuse, in that we have a wage gap and we have an inflation crisis, which makes it hard for us to be thinking about how far can we stretch our dollars, and it makes it easier to not see the ways in which our stretching is choking someone else.
Now, we got a question from the audience that I think is an important one, which is essentially this: where will the fashion industry go if everybody is buying things recycled or at the thrift store, or if it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller? How do you envision the fashion and clothing industry of the future? What would it look like? Is it just a lot smaller but sustainable in a different way?
I think it'll probably depend on what happens with the state of the environment writ large. Like if the environment, if we stay on this course of really profound environmental collapse, then it will have to, all economies will have to be restructured. We'll have to think about, if we can't cross the seas the way that we used to, or we can't access the plants, or the soil quality is so degraded that we can't do it, we'll have to think about, this is like, I don't want to go to like the furthest edge of apocalyptic dystopian thinking, right? But I want us to recognize too that that these things, there's trigger events that happen, and with every trigger event there'll have to be a real resetting. And I was talking to a group of students at Temple yesterday about the beauty of things burning. We're watching all of this burning, and it's so hard to process the loss that's happening in real time. But there's also another thing that happens in soil that's recovered from a fire, that's really fertile soil for beautiful things. So I think there's something to be said about what is the apocalyptic vision of what happens when things get really bad, but what if we look at it and say, like, wow, if we really watch this, all of these collapses happen, what's the most beautiful thing we can envision building? And then how do we invest in that build out now as a way of placing our energies, right? Not placing our energies on the worst case, but what comes next? What is the boldest thing we can envision for what might yet still be possible? And so I want us to hold that in our gaze at the same time.
Yeah. And maybe talk a bit about what are the defining features of a sustainable clothing, textile industry we could build in your answer.
So that's a perfect segue, because basically what Emma and I decided to do when we started the PA Flax Project was to start building a regional scale supply chain at the beginning of that supply chain. So I think that's where the fashion industry goes. It becomes a right-sized regional scale industry where you build industry that's sustainable, that fits into the communities in which you live, and those become interconnected regional scale supply chains across the world, if we're lucky, right? And so we can support one another. If one region suffers catastrophic climate change, another region can support them. So you still have a fairly large industry, it's just not monolithic.
Rachel?
Yeah, love both those answers. I think it's almost hard to imagine what it could look like because we've been in this system for so long, and I think a reimagining of it would really, we kind of do have to start completely over. We also are really up against a lot of textiles that already exist in the world, and so for me, we can't forget about that piece as well. That's a big part of this puzzle. I think I just read something recently, and I've actually seen it written both ways, that we either have enough clothes to clothe either 6 or 7 generations of people that we actually don't need to make any more clothing. And that's
How many generations?
6 or
It's
6 and 7.
I heard 6, but all those, you have to take into consideration how cheap all those clothes
Yes.
are, so they're not gonna last for 6 generations.
And they're also mostly made of synthetic fibers, which produce microplastics every time you wash them and are detrimental to our water systems and our soil systems. So we're always talking about, like, what do we do with all the stuff that already exists? Because yes, it would be great to reimagine and build all these other systems, and that also needs to happen. And we also need to address the waste that exists without putting a Band-Aid on it. Like right now you might hear a lot about like textile recycling, and that's not solving this issue upstream. That's dealing with like, okay, here we are, how did we get here? Now we have to kind of fix this problem, but that also requires energy and water and processing and chemicals. And so that piece, I think, has a lot to be reimagined, and we need to figure out solutions to what actually does already exist, because that $5 stuff that nobody wants is sitting around, and we're seeing it now in LA. There are so many clothes that are donated to people in LA, right? Which is like, great, yeah, I'm donating something. Nobody wants them.
Yeah.
They're sitting there.
So what do we do with all that stuff? Any ideas coming to the fore? Yes?
So I'm very personally conflicted about this, because I think we need to educate, there's 2 ways to look at it. I think we need to start to have designers be educated on how do we take what already exists instead of make something new. However, like I said about the microplastics, I don't love that, because then we're keeping this microplastic stuff in our system for longer. And so these are conversations Leslie and I have all the time, because it really is, there's no perfect answer. And in the world of sustainability and fashion, there's never a perfect answer. It's always like, what's maybe the better option, or like the least bad option is sometimes how we have to look at it, which can be disappointing and frustrating. But we need to stop this mass overproduction, and until we can like turn off the water spout of the influx of all of this clothing, like we're really stuck. And that's where I think a lot of policy and other things like that can help to shift those narratives.
The sad truth is there's no good way to recycle textiles. I mean, that's the sad truth. Like, most textiles are mixed fiber, most of them have polyester, most of them are gonna slough microplastics into the waterways and end up in the food, on the plate, at the dinner table. So the shutting off the faucet is what we have to do. That's it. Like, we have to shut off the faucet, we have to produce natural fibers, wear vintage, wear thrifted, and I would argue that this system hasn't existed for that long. Like, fast fashion is relatively new, it's my lifetime. And so I think if we look to the past and we think about the fact that when I was a kid, we got to buy clothes 2 times a year, right? And so I think we do have to look to that. We have to moderate our consumption. That's the only way to shut off the faucet.
Yeah. Kimberly, did you want to contribute to that? What do you think is the best way right now to begin to change the system, to turn off that faucet?
I think that the first revolution, and that's what we need, is a revolution. The first revolution that has to happen is deeply personal, and in my view, it's very spiritual. And it's really about a deepening sense of what our emotional needs are, and why is it that we're turning so constantly towards materialism and consumption as a source of emotional and spiritual medication. And so I think that begins in like this personal sense of self-examination and self-awareness and developing new personal tools that make the pursuit of the quick and the cheap just less and less and less attractive. And so, and I think that's actually the cheapest thing for us to do, right? That's not the thing that you buy, that's the work that you do when you're alone. So I think that's a part of this equation that we have to factor in. It is about government action, it is about corporate action, and it's also about discovering, rediscovering, owning our own sense of personal agency in terms of, what are we reaching for, and where else could we maybe better anchor our action in a challenging time.
Right now, what happens to our clothing after we discard it? Whether we end up putting it in the trash because it's beyond redemption, or we put it in a donation bag and we feel good about that. Rachel's doing this.
They're ugly trimmings from Rachel.
Sorry, I'm really being a Debbie Downer here. So we have a problem with donating because we think that, we just put something in our donation bin, it can be stained or missing a button, someone will want it, I'm doing a good thing. Well, no, you're not. You're actually clogging up the system and making it worse. About 80% of what we donate still ends up in landfill. Again, we go back to this huge global marketplace. So when you donate something to like a Goodwill, let's say, or some place like that, they sell what they can. So they sort through it. If things are stained or missing stuff, it kind of goes quickly to another pile, and what they sell it at one price point, they'll discount it, they'll try and sell it again, until they can get the most value out of it. And then from there, whatever cannot be sold is typically baled up in these huge bales that are probably like 5 or 6 feet tall, and then stacked and put on a ship, and typically end up in many places all over the world, where they're sold in secondhand markets there. Again, we've tried to sell in the secondhand markets there, and then still we have too much. And the quality of what we have has completely decreased due to fast fashion. So still nobody wants the stuff, and then it ends up in a landfill in somebody else's backyard that did not cause the making of the stuff, and then causes issues for people in another part of the world, which then is a whole other host of problems.
And I wanted to say just landfills. I think we have a visual of a landfill as like an empty, abandoned, open plot of land that you dig a hole in and you dump stuff on top and you get a really big mountain and then you cover it with grass and then it's like it doesn't exist. That is a thing. But this notion of landfills also means the washing up on shores. It means the clogging of local water streams. It means just literally public fashion fabric waste on public streets, right? So it's not the notion of it ending up. I just want to create be very intentional about how we think about where waste lands up. It's not the way that we think of it in this country. And it will be the way that we'll have to think about it in this country because of the extent of how much waste there is. So right now, we currently think, oh, there's like fabric all over the streets of like, you know, I don't know, Accra in Ghana. And we're like, that's how it is in Accra in Ghana. And I'm like, temperature check. That is very quickly going to be the shores of waterways and public streets globally because there's just that much being produced, right? So that's where it becomes like, okay, let's sit in reality and let's move accordingly.
And the other thing that cycle does is it destroys local textile industries that have been traditionally embedded in cultures that have meaning, that have spiritual meaning, that create community. And so just creating a bunch of garbage that gets dumped on top of an industry that is not intrinsically evil. I mean, textiles are tens of thousands of years old and have been an important part of humanity for a long time, and there's so much beauty in textiles, and it's just being obliterated with greed.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to get into more granularly into the work each of you do, and I think we have the perfect setup question for Heidi here, which is there one natural fiber that is better than others?
That's not a fair question, like I'm very prejudiced. The Pennsylvania Flax Project. I'm 100% obsessed with linen. And linen is a very environmentally friendly textile, and it's a very versatile textile. It has many really beautiful qualities. The plant is gorgeous, so it's delightful and seductive. And the fabric is very versatile. I'm wearing a pair of linen pants of one weight and a linen blouse of the other, and a linen knit t-shirt of yet a third. So it can do a lot of different things, and it's much more environmentally friendly than cotton, which at least in our regions, cotton needs more irrigation, flax needs very little, and by the way, linen is flax. So hemp, I think, is another fiber that would be very environmentally friendly. And cotton in some regions, and then the animal fibers. Also, I think there's not an easy answer to that question, because if you live in a place where the climate is good for sheep and alpaca, that's going to be the most environmentally friendly. If you live in a climate that's good for growing cotton, that's going to be the most environmentally friendly. You want to look for a fiber where the processing doesn't require chemicals, which means bamboo is out. Sorry, you guys. Bamboo is not sustainable. It's just not. The processing of it is, for the most part, very chemical intensive. So you want to look for a fiber that can be processed from either plant or animal to yarn or thread for it to be woven without chemicals. So.
And that's a spectrum, right? There's like, what is the best case scenario, and then what's the worst case scenario? And I think in terms of like thinking about when I read a label, what should I pay attention to and what should I avoid? And this is where we get into this deeper understanding of like, where does rayon come from, right? And where does spandex come from? But I'm going to give you the widest spectrum. Polyesters and spandex are the most dangerous. They're among the most dangerous because they're rooted in petroleum, right? So there's an impact from the oil industry on that, and there's the microplastics that are part of that. And then on the other extent of what the best thing is the natural fibers. So you're looking at the linen, you're looking at those like where there's the rare hemp, if you can find that, and understanding what weight feels good for you, right? So that's the spectrum. The hell no's are the petroleums, that's the spandex. That's when we gotta say like, absolutely no more. We have got to literally clean it up. We don't even want it in our pores, right? So we haven't talked about that at all. We just talked about this is really bad for the environment, but it's actually really bad for our individual ecosystems as well, right? Those plastics that are showing up in our waterways, when our pores are open, particularly when we're sweating, they leach. So there's another endocrine-related reason why these are things that we should personally try to advocate for protecting ourselves from on a very individual level.
And I'm going to add about spandex, that the percent spandex makes no difference. Any percent spandex is a big hell no. If those blue jeans that are all 3% spandex, I don't know who invented that.
How did they just,
you know?
That's the thing about
They're
standards.
bad. They're bad. They're bad.
But, so what do you wear to exercise? Can you make exercise wear out of linen? Like, what do you wear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And out of wool too.
What's
There's
that?
actually a lot of new exercise brands coming out with wool. Yeah, lots of
Like a
different.
sports bra type thing?
Yes, and let me tell you, it's a myth that wool is itchy because there is some super soft, buttery wool out there. Let me tell you. And in Pennsylvania, actually, we have a lot of people who have wool.
So what this really means is we have to have a clear fact set and an open mind, right? We have to understand that it's like eating junk food. The thing that comes to you most easily, probably not the best thing for you to eat, right? So we have to be conscious in that same way that our clothes are just another form of our diets.
And right, you can, and an open mind is good. Like, we're so programmed to think, but we need stretch. But knit is stretched. It's the way the fiber is processed. It's not what's in the fiber.
Yeah.
So you can have 100% cotton knit that's stretchy, that would be beautiful exercise wear. You do not need spandex. You do not need polyester. It's just we've been convinced we do. So you just got to try the thing that's 100%. You got to get the merino wool sports bra. I can do it.
It might feel a little different at first. I just want to don't get discouraged. It's not going to feel like a tight spandex legging is going to feel. It's going to feel better. You're going to feel, your skin's going to breathe, and it's going to be magical. Like, I love linen also. Like, my shirt's also linen. It's the best fiber ever. And if you start to wear it, once you start to wear natural fibers, you will just feel like when you put on anything else.
All right. That's really all really good advice. So we have another perfect question from the audience. I think this one is for you, Rachel. What can we do to support Pennsylvania farmers and growers of natural fibers?
I'm going to also let Heidi answer that too.
Yes,
Great question. Well, we need to develop our supply chain, so you can become a member of Pennsylvania Fiber Shed. You can support our farmers through that. We do a lot of education. We have a lot of work coming up with the Sheep and Wool Association in Pennsylvania. We're doing a lot of work around them, with them. And I think the best thing you can do is to buy locally whenever possible. So even if you're a knitter, let's say, and you are buying yarn from a store, buy from a local farmer in Pennsylvania. The wool actually comes directly from the farm, and typically the farmers are selling it on their own websites. We have a list of many of those yarn resources on our pafibershed.org website. So the best way you can support farmers is to give them your money. That's what they need. But also, we need to develop this supply chain, which is like really years of work. We're missing a lot of pieces of the puzzle, especially for animal fibers right now. Our processing facilities are quickly dwindling away. We're losing generational knowledge. There sometimes is a 2-year backlog to process yarn. So if you can, like I said, if you're using yarns, buy that from your farmer. A lot of these farmers also sell many other products. So support your local farmers. Buy a vegetable from them, buy a fruit from them, buy soap from them. We have some members who have, they're making soap and all kinds of things, So supporting them in that way while we're also doing this other work to help build these systems, I think is really important. There's no easy, we're not having this new system built tomorrow, but we are slowly working towards that.
And I can also say that if we don't make these changes, we're actually going to slow down the idea that they will come into blossom. So we have to make the changes so that we can even give them a chance of thriving. If we don't invest in them, then they will dry up. And then this conditioning will be even worse than it is right now. So there is a sense of urgency around being immediate about, oh no, oh my goodness, we really have to figure out how do we get intentional about shopping. Yes, shopping small, shopping hyper-local.
Heidi, did you want to add to that?
I do want to add to it. I'm just trying to frame it. So it's hard to support fiber farmers because fiber farmers don't really exist here because there's no middle of the infrastructure. So, but if there's anyone out there that wants to invest in a project that's changing it, you know, Pennsylvania Flax Project, we are working with farmers to scale production of flax and to build the infrastructure to process it into spinnable fiber. So, supporting farmers in any way you can, meaning buying food locally, buying anything a farmer produces locally, support your local farmers first. Farmers have diversified crops. They don't grow just one thing generally. So any way you can support a farmer will encourage their existence so that they can become part of the natural fibers revolution. Also, you know, policy, I know the Farm Bill is a big messy thing, but you can pay attention to it. You can talk to representatives about adding fiber into those programs, and you can plug into organizations who are advocating like this fiber shed and the big mothership fiber shed. I don't know what they call them anymore.
Fibershed.org now.
Fibershed.org. So I think it's important to understand that this is an economic issue and it's a political issue.
I also want to just add, since we just were touching on policy, that there's something called a Slow Fashion Caucus. Please, the Slow Fashion Caucus. Yes, with Senator Pingree. And we've been involved in a lot of the conversations involving that creation. It's very exciting. Contact your representatives and tell them to join. This is a way that we can really influence big change.
Now, Kimberly, I think a couple of these questions are perfect for you. One question is, where does this leave young designers without a future, question mark? So what about people who want to get into designing, clothing, fashion, love fashion? How should they think about this field?
There's always a future. I think that the future that I hope that young designers imagine is centered in using their fashion as a source of activism and resistance, and that means that it has to align with something that you deeply care about personally, and that you stand kind of 10 toes on that becomes an anchor of how you approach design. Because Toni Morrison talks about how art is the voice of resistance, right? We have to imagining a future is an act of resistance. So I wouldn't discourage a future. Someone who's in their heart feels like design is the thing that will be their offering, that they should deny themselves that yearning. I think you have to figure out design is your thing, and we're all ultimately designers. Whether we're designing tech or we're designing homes, we are as humans we are artful, we are designers. Anchor your pursuit in what is good for the common good, and then aspire to align your methodology with the values that are centering what will be best for us all. And I think if you do that, no matter what you offer, it'll position itself to do some good yet in the world. And sing the song of what you produce, what you're designing, with joy, because that's another thing that has to be infectious in this moment. So don't say that it can't be done. When I built Grant Blvd, it was 7 years of trying to figure out how to produce a design solution with a circumstance and a series of systems that were so antithetical to everything I wanted to see in the world. But the idea that I tried is a way that you give life for someone else to say, maybe it can be done. Maybe I can be the one. So, be the one. Produce the thing that you want to see in the world.
Next question is also, I think, a good one for you. How can we incorporate artistic expression and experimentation alongside sustainable fashion? So I think sometimes sustainable fashion has a certain look by design. It's a lot of linen, it's a lot of natural stuff, okay? So what if you don't want to look like that, you want to look in a different way? Is that doable with natural fibers, right? Because I think natural fibers has gotten boxed into a certain vibe, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I think that's one methodology. The natural fiber way is a methodology, and we've come a long way with dyes and what you can do with dyes and how you can use dyes to tell stories. And using non-toxic dyes and using community dye vats. Like, there's going to be something about it that will not necessarily mimic the bold colors that we're used to on the Paris, runway. But is that what we still want? Like, this is the fundamental question, right? Is what we're seeing there, is that really our due north for what fashion can deliver on? And I would argue that it can't just end there. The designers that I find their work most kind of romantic are people who are using almost like a collage approach to how they think about design. And they use fashion and fabrics to do what we all have to do, which is stitch together the stories of our lives and our lens. So, I think that there's a lot of existing materials, to Rachel's earlier point, that we can play with, and there are a lot of ways we can avoid creating yet more new waste. So the experiment is and the art is in being innovative and original, and that's what design is. It's innovative and original.
Also, working with natural fibers can be a design challenge, and we're all designers. And so, I had 15 years in costume design, and in my last year of designing costumes, I decided not to use any new material and to use 50% natural fibers. And I achieved the same sorts of fantastical looks. You just have to dig into your imagination and push the limits of your medium. And if your medium is fashion, and you've made a commitment to sustainability, you push the limits of your medium and create something beautiful. There's so much beauty available.
What did you learn in that process when you made the commitment you're going to change how you do the work?
I learned that design is all about problem solving, and that if you set yourself a very clear problem, it's limitless what you can do within that boundary. There's so much room to play. And it's the problem itself that becomes the design hook.
Great, and this is why we need designers, and we really need designers that have a commitment to growing these supply chains and investing in these supply chains to give the farmers a place to sell their stuff, right? You were just saying, how can you support a local designer or a farmer? You could become a designer that invests in that supply chain and works directly with the farmer to figure out, okay, how do I take your raw material and how do I make it into what I need?
Yeah, I think I saw Dave earlier, so it's a conversation I've had with him about how great it would be if designers were actually working at the level where they were going to the farm and talking about, what seed are we going to plant to accomplish the material I want to work with.
Yeah, and we saw that happen in food, where chefs started to go to farms more and really have that conversation. What are you going to grow, right? So it can be done. Now, we are getting a lot of questions about affordability, and I think that's a big, important topic, because fast fashion is cheap, but a lot of times it's also affordable to people who cannot afford a lot of the other things, and natural fibers right now tend to be a bit more expensive, especially if you want to pay real close attention to where and how they were grown. So what is that divide right now, and how can that that gap be closed eventually?
Eventually is a key word there.
Yeah.
Cost is real. So thrifting is good. I didn't buy clothes for a really long time because basically I could unknow all of this stuff that we're talking about, and with the knowledge I couldn't buy fast fashion. And I got real sick of my wardrobe. But I think in the long term, if we invest in regional supply chains, we'll be investing in our communities. So, with a sketching mill that can turn your flax into spinnable fiber comes jobs. Comes good paying local jobs, right? It comes farmer pay, So as we sort of start to regionalize our supply chains, the money will come back into our communities. That is not a quick fix. I'm definitely not addressing the I need a new pair of pants for my child who grew a foot last week.
Yeah.
That's real. And so I don't think. Anyway, I think it's a long-term issue, but I think it's good to realize that as the work is to bring the work back into our communities.
And I'm going to go on, and I'm going to think about extending that. So, yes, the cost of things that are sustainably produced is one thing, and a lot of this conversation about sustainable production, it completely denies the conversation that we have to have about wages and the wage crisis, and the ways in which, you know, we have to figure out how to right side that too, as an act of social and economic justice. That said, I think that, you know, the things that we own, I think about the things that I spend money on. I think about the books I invest in. I think about the rare vinyl that I invest in, the artists that I support. They're all heirlooms. So I want to think about this as, and this is I think a challenge sometimes for us to think of long term. I choose the pieces I'm going to spend more money on because they are a part of my own personal legacy. And if that means that as we think about how do we spend more on fewer things, I think that that's another strategy. For some people, even when affordability is a concern, will decide, I want the $5,000 bag, or I want the $200 bag, or I want the $200 pair of shoes, or we choose what we're going to invest a lot of money in. I hope that more of us invest a lot of money in things that are ethically produced and that are sustainably sourced. And that doesn't resolve the immediate issue of the school uniform that we need to buy for this fall, but it does create what I hope is a better pursuit of balance in our consumptive practices. Right? It's not that we can buy everything right away that is ethically produced and sustainable. There is a huge cost in that. But we can decide when I do shop and I do make an investment, that will be the anchor of my dollar. I'm going to vote that way. Every time I can, I'm going to vote that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think the cost thing, when I always get asked that question, is to thrift. I think that thrifting is still affordable. If that's a way that you want to tap into being more sustainable, that's an excellent way to do it. That's available, that's affordable to most people. And producing clothing ethically is more expensive. We are never going to be able to pay somebody a fair wage and get a $5 t-shirt. It's just not possible. Somebody is going to lose if that's the case.
And there's a cost to that $5 t-shirt that we're all starting to pay. So it's another way to look at it, to say, where are we paying for those cheap clothes? Because we're paying for them. Like, we're sick, you know, we can't drink our water, our infrastructure is crumbling. Like, we're paying for it.
And our moral positioning to advocate for living wages in this country is made weaker when we're okay with other people being exploited. When we don't recognize that the floor has to rise everywhere, then we are suggesting that we too can suffocate under it. And so it does become a matter of, if we want to have a higher quality of life, or even in a very selfish, narrow thinking of citizenship for Americans and this notion of American citizens, that denies the fact that we are part of a global community. And the floor of the planet is the floor that we too will have to be in recognition that we can somehow sink under. So this is it is actually very personal. We may think of it as like, oh, it's their air, it's their water, it's their wages. That's a fantasy that denies the reality of our interconnectedness.
Talk a bit more about the work you do at Grant Blvd, because it is a very holistic approach to the system. So what are you hoping to do there?
You know, we set out back in 2017 to think about using design to create living wage work for the people who are living in the cracks. Those are women whose lives have been impacted by the criminal system. And when I thought about where does change begin, I thought about how do we get to the most vulnerable, most marginalized women in our country. And in our country, it's predominantly Black women who have a history of conviction. If you get arrested, which, I mean, this is the other thing, right? I think a lot of us have a psychological hierarchy that says, like, if you have a conviction, then that means that you are a bad person and that you are different than me, you're worse than me. But I'm going to ask of you to be courageous. How many of you have broken the law? Raise your hand if you've broken the law. Everybody should have a hand up. I mean, underage drinking, I don't know, did you buy marijuana somewhere? Who smoked weed? I don't know. You know, everybody's had their moment of infringement, right? But that doesn't mean that you got caught. It doesn't mean that you got arrested. It doesn't mean that you got charged. It doesn't mean that you got convicted. And there are odds that make that more likely depending on where you live and who you're with and what you look like. And if gender is a part of that formula, women are particularly at risk. And so I wanted to experiment with solution making. And I thought that style could be the way. So Grant Blvd evolved into a solution that did something really hard, which is intentional intersectional solution making. And I learned so much about the lives of women whose experience is not inherently my own. While I have broken the law, I've never been arrested or charged or convicted, I don't have any felonies that I have to defend or explain or carry with me everywhere I go and every conversation that I enter into. But I do know that those hardships are real, and I wanted to use fashion as a mechanism for just experimenting with solution finding. And so we've been iterating, right? Teaching women who come home from prison how to sew, being in community with them, figuring out how do we teach yoga and make that a way that we build community and equality, equity within our work culture. And it's been a beautiful and hard journey. We were producing in Kensington, which has its own emotional weight when you're coming in and out of that neighborhood, and we're figuring out how do we survive? What does thriving look like, and how do we use design to do that? So that's the story of what Grant Blvd and now NOOR by Grant Blvd has always anchored itself in. It did not start, and now if you guys look at NOOR by Grant Blvd, it's in the luxury space. I didn't want to start there. I don't even buy luxury myself, but I wanted to pay, and I've always paid a living wage. I've actually thought about how do I pay even more? And the only way that we can do that, just cost of goods, is it means it has to be like a Robin Hood story. Where it's like we're going to figure out those who have, how do we build and bring into community women who have and take care of their needs, and by extension, take care of women who don't have very much. And that has been that I think is the way we right this ship, is that we get to that okay, we're going to have to reallocate, we're going to bring into a new sense of community, we got to take care of each other.
But the system approach to thinking about the situation is inherent in all of your work, I feel like.
And we think about like how do we use linen in our design, right? And that becomes in like, okay, how do we link up, right, as solution makers?
Right, and one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about with Pennsylvania Flax Project is how do we continue to integrate community and art and education into an industrial project. We are looking to build a mill that will process 4,000 acres annually of flax, right? And we're looking to reimagine an industry that will be right-sized and beneficial for our community. And so it's sort of, what's the community we need to tap into? How can we engage? And how can we keep the heart and the beauty at the center of an industry, so that we're not just recreating the problem on a mini scale, right? We want the living wages, we want the community involvement, and we want the beauty in it.
And when you spread the word about flax, are growers excited about this crop?
Bill, are growers excited about this crop? I think
they are. It takes a special person to want to kind of break the mold of what they know that works. Farmers are kind of stuck.
Yeah, so we're asking farmers to take a risk. I work very hard to minimize the risk we're asking farmers to take, because farmers already exist in a very risky space. We've been fortunate enough to be able to raise money to guarantee a modest minimum payment for our early adopter farmers, so that we can attract the kind of growers who are risk takers and are interested in this niche crop and this new industry, who are smitten with the idea of this revolution, right? And the plan is, and the hope is, that as these early adopter farmers come on, other farmers will see them succeed, and that will grow the interest. Yeah.
And Rachel, I was looking at your website earlier, and you have a map with a fiber map, so to speak, with different producers. And is that map growing? Are we seeing more little dots on it every month, I hope?
Yes, we are. Yes, having a little technology issue with that map currently right now, but yes, it will be growing for sure. That's one of our projects we're always adding to. We're always getting new members, especially that are farmers and producers, and working in the fiber space, and we're always working to update that map, absolutely. So that's a great resource where you can certainly find different pieces of the puzzle along the supply chain. So there's farmers on there, there will be designers on there as well, so you know who is sourcing from a local supply chain if you want to support those people. There's mills, there's cut and sew facilities. So if you're a designer, you can also look there to figure out where you want to tap into your production.
Now, earlier on in the beginning of our conversation, you talked about all the different aspects of what has to happen before a piece of clothing even reaches a shelf. Dyeing is one of the things that happens. Are there interesting, sustainable methods coming around, or coming back rather, that people are using?
Yes, I would say. There's definitely, and this is like a space where there's a lot of controversy, like people get really heated in the dye discussion. So take that for what it is. But they do. But I love using food dyes, like natural food dyes. You can make the most beautiful colors out of like a beet powder or onion skins or avocado pits, like stuff in your kitchen, and it lasts. And you know, you're not gonna get like neon yellow, but there's actually turmeric does a pretty good neon yellow, so I take that back. But there's a lot of opportunity there. There's also, in the biology world, there's a lot of stuff happening. Like, I was just talking to one of my students about like bacteria that can dye, or like you can grow fabric now out of like bacteria and mushrooms. Like one of my colleagues at Drexel, this is much more complicated than I'm making it, but you can like feed the bacteria coffee, and then it like has different properties and does all this crazy stuff. So like, yes, there is certainly new technology in this world emerging all the time. I'm not a scientist and will not pretend to be. But it is very exciting, and I think also in that vein, I've learned through my work in sustainability and sustainable fashion that we always then have to ask, like, okay, what could be the possible problem? Because there typically is one, and that's where you get into that idea of like, okay, maybe we found this thing that's really innovative and great. So for example, a few years ago, we had fabric made out of plastic water bottles, and everyone was like, woo, this is so sustainable, we saved all the bottles from the oceans, yay! Now we have a bigger problem than we did with the bottles in the oceans, because now we just have fabric made out of microplastics that's just shedding microplastics, and we can't recycle it, whereas the water bottle, we probably could have just recycled it and kept it in that form. So I think there's always new solutions happening, and we also need to always think about what could be the possible downside to these new solutions.
There's some old solutions that are really good, you know. So, and in the dye world, there is somebody in Pennsylvania, Winona Quigley at Green Matters Natural Dye, who has an at-scale plant-based dye house. So she's a commercial-scale plant-based dye house. She collects rainwater to use because dyeing is water-intensive, and she produces beautiful colors in a large range of colors. So that's a very, very old solution that's been reinterpreted for a modern application. And so I think it's good to realize that that's happening, and there's a community dive out there. So we should support businesses like that, and we should shop them out and support them, because it's pretty magical.
Could you repeat that name?
Yeah, it's Green Matters Natural Dye Company, and it's in Gap, Pennsylvania.
And a community dye bath, for those that don't know, you can send, if you have like a stain on something or you're just sick of something and you want to update the color, you can send it to Winona. They throw it in one big giant vat of dye. So she'll say like, this month's color is crimson, or she has all pretty names. And then you can send it in, and then she sends it back to you in its brand new color. So it's very exciting.
I just want to mention Winona is going to be here on Saturday.
Oh yeah, so she's going to be here on Saturday at the Academy for the dyeing event. So
It's an indigo
dyeing, fabric dyeing. So we had a question that I wanted to bring up real quick, which was about the role of science and how much you work, or how important it is to collaborate with scientists in these different processes, whether it's climate science when you're growing flax, or the kind of science you mentioned in terms of fabrics and textiles and so on. Is there a good solid collaboration here
about the lovely ad at the beginning, that science matters. You know, we believe in science. So affirming that science matters. We believe in science. And I think that science is like soil science, from like thinking about agriculture and what's happening at the soil level, to, you know, what's happening in terms of like how we're paying attention to water quality and the quality of ecosystems around our water streams, and how all of these systems are so deeply integrated they cannot be separated. So I think that the work that has already happened that has to be affirmed is that we look at science from that lens, that every system touches another system, and that we have to protect them not one at a time, not a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's all hands on deck. It's all, you know, it's like all the systems at one time.
It is, and we need scientists and we need engineers in this world. For example, how we clean wool is called scouring, and that process is very water intensive. Like, there is opportunity for innovation there. Like, somebody who's really smart is gonna figure something out that's really cool around that. We need that stuff. We need the innovation along our whole fashion system. There is room for technology and innovation and science, absolutely.
So, yes, I mean, science and industry are inseparable, and science and agriculture are inseparable. And I mean, like, just on a tiny scale, like, we're working on regional seed varieties that will do well here. There's science involved there. There's the retting of the flax. There's science involved there. I think in any natural process, there are so many scientific processes that happen. Natural processes are scientific processes. Like, those two things aren't separable. So I think if you don't reach out to your scientific community to collaborate, you're missing a huge opportunity to succeed.
And I wanted to take one last question from the audience, which is about how do you get this message out there? There are so many messages from all kinds of influencers who are making a lot of money, showing off their haul and what they just bought and what they just bought now and what they just bought 5 minutes ago. And, you know, I'm the mother of a teenage daughter, so I know all about that. And it's very hard to have a counter message and to make that counter message appealing. So how do we make your voices heard more frequently and make that impact that we want them to have?
I think education is so important. That's where we focus our energy right now at Pennsylvania Fiber Shed. We're also developing a K-12 curriculum, as well as an ambassador program at the college level. And it really has to start from when kids are young. Fiber stuff is fun, and it hits on all the STEAM goals. You can do so many hands-on experiments. I brought wool into my 2.5-year-old son's classroom. We felted with 2.5-year-olds. We read a book about sheep. Like, it's like there is a lot of stuff that you can do even from a young age for people to start to understand this stuff and get excited about it. I mean, we are up against a huge behavioral shift that needs to happen, and it is incredibly challenging to change behaviors. And even people that are so knowledgeable about this stuff, consumerism is deeply ingrained in who we are from a very young age. And so just having that continual conversation, that continual education. There are influencers also, by the way, that do promote this stuff, but we need more of them. And I think, like, just the more that we can do and talk about this in regular conversation, and the more people know, that is really how we're going to shift that.
I think too, you know, I think on two levels. One, there are certain celebrities that we hold in this state of like idol worship. You know, the Beyoncés, the Rihannas, and that's just two. Like we keep going. I really look forward to the day when those that we spend the most time paying attention to, when they become ambassadors and not you know, like, not leaders of great harm. So I want to continue to put more pressure on the people who we say that we idolize the most, and really also look at all the harm that they're calling forward by the way that they produce their own products, the way that they drive consumption in ways that are really problematic. I don't want us to let those really influential people off the hook. And at the same time, I also don't want us to forget that we as individuals are also influencers. Whether you have 50 people on your cell phone list, or you have 100 followers on Instagram or Facebook, you have an email list of 250 people, each of us has a locus of influence. So, in the stories that you're sharing and the news that you're reporting out to the people who care about you or paying attention to you, maybe you go a whole week where you're like, I love this sweater, sustainability, #sustainability. You figure out what's your campaign that becomes the way that you're going to just take positions. And I think that we often think that being political is always about the vote, and being political is also about all the actions that we do, that we create, and all the conversations we invite people into. Don't sleep on your own influence. Every single person has a platform, and all you need is the one right person. Right? We need one person in this room to say, I know Rihanna, I'm gonna put it in the chat, right? Everyone knows someone who has more influence even than you have. So how do we leverage our social networks to drive the change we want to see? And how do we recognize that even though we may not have those massive followings, we each have a great deal of influence. We have power. We have power. Let's activate our own individual power, and let's call on the people who are paying attention to us to bring them into greater action.
When Beyonce shows up in linen, we know that she
Yeah, she'll still be able to dance in it. Because I have a degree in dance, so I know how to make dance clothes. So I would say also just persistence, folks. Persistence. Like, you say it again, say it to everybody, keep at it, keep doing it, make the changes. They may be small changes, but chip away at it. That's how Emma and I approached the Flax Project. We're like, we'll show up anytime somebody wants to talk about it. We're going to be persistent, and we're doing it. Like, you can do it. We can do it.
And I never forget, particularly in this time where everything feels so hard. Frederick Douglass, activist, thought leader, he said that pessimism is a tool of the oppressor. Right? And so we take that old wisdom, pessimism is a tool of the oppressor, right? And why would pessimism be a tool? And then I think, what is the antidote to that? And to me, I think about how do we then protect our optimism, right? So we have to believe that change is possible. We have to believe that things can get better. We have to defend that with the same sense of urgency that we change our behavior. We have to protect our optimism, like fiercely.
I don't think we can find a more beautiful way to end our conversation. So I want to thank you so much. Just thinking about the conversation I was about to have with you, thinking about this topic has already made me change my approach to some things. I don't think I was a huge overconsumer, but I have already become more deliberate in my choices and in thinking about this topic. So I think even just having these conversations makes a difference. And I really want to thank all of you for being here, for helping us amplify this message, for your interest and your presence, and to our wonderful panel and their thought and work partners in the audience. I want to thank you for everything that you do to change this giant global system one step at a time. So thank you.
I just want to echo that. So I'm Molly Gross. I'm the Public Programs Manager, working with all these amazing people here. I also want to thank you guys, Mike and Kimberly, Heidi, and Rachel. This has just been an amazing conversation. And as many as you know, because Marina said beforehand, this is part of our Ecology of Fashion exhibition, which is going to be on view till the end of August. You have plenty of time to see it. And as I kind of yelled from the audience, Winona from Green Matter Dye is going to be here on Saturday, so in 2 days. From 2 to 4, doing a workshop about indigo dye. Every first Saturday of the month, we're doing a workshop of some sort around natural dyeing and about creating and about making through, I think, July. So check our website about that. And just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Something very, very different, just so you know everything that's coming up here. We're doing a game night on February 20th if you want to do something very, very different and play ecological games. And you can look on ansp.org to just learn about all the things we're doing here. And we hope to see you again very, very soon. Thanks, everybody, for coming.